Welcome everyone to Covert Farms. I'll just give you a very brief little background history. It was started in 1959 by my grandfather and grandmother, George and Winifred, and they're originally from California and came up here and saw this big sandy plateau as an opportunity at the time, and started it out in tomatoes and onions. It's been vineyards, orchards, ground crop, grazing, just about everything over the decades. In its current guise right now, we have about 145 acres at certified organic land. That's ground crops, pasture lands, and vineyards. There's 300 plus acres of conventional vineyard lease, and let's see, and yeah, I think that's about it right now. Currently, we've been certified organic since about 2005, and as you can see by the soil, dirt, sand in front of us, it's very sandy here, and we've really struggled on the nutrition side of the organic equation. And it was, you know, the good old YouTube University a few years ago, got into the regenerative farming scene and just checking out all these ranchers out in the Dakotas, and guys growing bananas in the jungle, and it all sort of started to click together that instead of trying to chase all these weeds out of here, we'll plant some cover crops and outcompete them with the crops that we want to grow. And so we have, for you today, we have a number of different cover crop scenarios and different life stages of the cover crops. Some that are just being planted, some that are mid-stage, some that are about to be terminated. And Mehdi here has some research plots that have been here, is 4 years now? Yeah, 4 years now. And Mehdi's going to go over his research. So what we thought we'd do, given the size of the group here, is we'd divide the group up into two, and Mehdi will take half with his team and I'll take the other half, and then we'll switch when we're done. And I'll hand it over to Mehdi now to explain.
Thanks so much, Gene and Emily. Thanks to Emily's team for coordinating all of that. It wasn't easy applying for the funding and pulling everything together, advertising, registering, and so on. So thank you so much to the team. Thanks to Gene for allowing us to and being very supportive in doing these experiments on his vineyard for the past 4 or 5 years. I'm a researcher with Agriculture Agri-Food Canada, Summerland Research Station. So our station is located in Summerland in Trout Creek. We have about 33 scientists working there on different aspects. My sort of area of focus is soil. I'm a soil scientist, but with the main part of my program is cover cropping. And I started that from east in Nova Scotia, and then Ontario. I did some projects on the grapes and growing cover crops in the grape production as well. When I moved here in 2016, I continued the same path and I started some work on the cover crops. This year, this is the project through CAP, Agriculture Agri-Food Canada, that provided the funding for the project. And this is the last year of this project. We put new proposals to continue the work for the next 5 years. I have 2 sites. One is here down south in the warmer climate, and one in West Kelowna, which is a little bit cooler. The soil is very sandy here, as Gene mentioned. It's a little bit more silty and heavier soil texture so they're kind of like the climate-wise and soil-wise is slightly different, and we wanted to show that kind of contrast between the sites. I have several students that help with the project, and also technician. Can you raise your hand? My students are here now. They supported the project. Bill is my technician, who help putting together a lot of these irrigation system that you're going to see here. So if you have any questions about the irrigation, he would be the expert. We also have many of the provincial experts here today, and if I can answer a question, they probably can help me, and Gene can help me to answer those questions. What else I want to say? Okay, so maybe about the project. In 2016 that I came, I started kind of studying the cover crops in this region. This is a semi-arid region. I had experience with the humid region, growing cover crops in the vineyards, but semi-arid is totally different story. So the goals are different, the climate is different, soil is different, so you need to have a different cropping system or cover cropping system. In 2018 I got funding. I did and you can see that in this little pamphlet, some information. Later you can read it. I thought it's good if you have that with you, and then later you can get more information about the project. 2018 I tested 24 different species in the greenhouse, and then I moved to the field testing in 2019. I had 280 plots across the valley, and I tested 15 different species in the alleyway and 9 different species under vine. So the under vine and alleyways, they're totally 2 different microenvironments. The crops or the species that work for the alleyway, they're not necessarily suitable for growing under vine. So for under vine, what you want something that is not competitive. And it's a little bit more shaded. You need something that doesn't grow too tall. So many characteristics for under vine cover crop, and the under vine cover crop is relatively more newer idea than the alleyways, because in the past everyone would like to keep under the trees or under the vine bare. So a lot of like spraying glyphosate a few times during the year to keep it like no competition almost. And that was the best practice in the past, conventional. And now we're getting to this understanding of there is a certain tolerance. So there is a threshold that you can grow things under vine, but you gotta have a right recipe. So you don't want that competition. You don't want the cover crop that grow too much. So the goal here is very different than the field crop. In the field crop, you want to grow a cover crop that produce a lot of biomass. In the vineyard and orchard, a lot of biomass is actually a trouble, and Gene knows. So you don't want to go like mow it like lawn every 2 weeks. So you want something that has this balance. It has the right kind of growth rate. It doesn't get too tall. It has certain drought tolerance. So I have a list of these different parameters that a good cover crop can have for this region. So I'm just going to go through a few different. I don't want to have a long speech and get you bored. The best kind of thing is that to see it for yourself how the cover crop is growing, and then compare those and see. And this is one of the great sites that you can see all these differences between the cover crops. So for the cover crop options, you have the species options is one. So you have brassica, you have the grasses, and you have the legumes. These are the 3 main groups that you can choose from. There are some broadleaves like buckwheat as well. So those are also different groups of cover crop that you can choose. And then you have annual versus perennial. So it depends on your goal and where you're located and the climate. You can go with the perennial cover crops that they can last more than 1 year, or you can go with the annual that you have to plant it every year. Usually for under vine, based on our experience, the annuals, they work better, so you have to plant it every year. But some of the annuals, they have these reseeding capacity. For example, Gene is planting lentils under the vine with a great success, and they reseed themselves. And also they're food for the chickens, so sometimes the chickens can enjoy that. So it's multi-purpose. So annuals, not necessarily is that you need to go every year that plant them. Technically, in the definition, you have to seed them every year. But if you establish it and they start reseeding themselves, I know that Hans has the vetch that they're reseeding themselves. He has it for several years, and now they reseed themselves. So that's annual versus perennial. And then you have an individual plants group or a species versus mixture. So you can have a mixture of different plants. And sometimes if you choose that mixture right, they're helping each other. And I know that Gene have up to like 20 species, 25 sometimes. And some of these species depends on if this give you a buffering capacity. If the climate is not appropriate for some of those species, it's appropriate for the other ones, and they can grow. And they can, when you have a mixture, they can use the best of the resources. For example, the grasses, they have very surface root, so they can use the nutrient and resources on the surface of the soil. And tillage radish, it can go deep up to like a meter, so it can use the resources in the bottom. Or buckwheat can use the resources in the depth of the soil. So that is another thing to consider. And then fall versus spring, fall plantation versus the spring planting. We have some experience with the fall planting, and there is that risk into the fall planting if you don't get enough of a snowpack, and if you get a very cold winter, you may lose your plant in the spring. So we kind of switched to the spring plantation, planting the cover crops in most of my experiments. And the cover crop, it could be for the field crop, you can have the plant that you're planting after harvesting your main crop. So for example, if you have a field of wheat, when you harvest it, you can plant red clover, and then you have quite a bit of biomass by the end of the season. So it has a good window. Or you can plant it between the main crops. So here, what we have in vineyard and orchards, we have both main plants and the cover crop at the same time. They're growing together, and sometimes they're even helping each other. And I mentioned the differences between the drive row, which is the alleyways, and undervine. Something that when you're choosing the cover crop is very important is the goal. So because cover crops, they can do different things for you. So one major thing that cover crops can do is improving your soil health. And what is soil health? It can be the carbon in the soil, so carbon sequestration, so increasing the soil organic matter, especially very important in this sandy soil, because the sandy soils, they have very low capacity for holding on to the nutrients. It has very little, it has capacity for holding the organic matter. So you want to have a flux of organic matter to your soil, and organic matter is like food for the organisms. So like us, we need to eat food to be able to do things. Organisms, the same thing. And their food is organic matter. You want to feed them so they can do all these good things and processes and cycling of the nutrient in the soil for you. Biological nitrogen fixation, that you all probably know about it. All these nitrogen in the air, they're not available for the plant. Some of the plant species has the capacity to fix the nitrogen and then release it to the soil. So we can take advantage of that. Mainly the legumes have that capacity to fix nitrogen, and using that, it will reduce your nitrogen use or fertilizer use. Erosion is another factor. So some people, they do cover croppings to reduce the erosion. Especially in this region, you see many of the vineyards are on a slope. So you want to really reduce. If you don't cover the ground, the soil is going to wash down. So and nutrients as well with the soil. Compaction is another major issue I always mention in the alleyways or driveway, because people drive a lot on that. So its soil is very, very compacted. In some of the vineyards, when a student can confirm that when we want to collect the soil samples, we barely can go with the auger to like 5 centimeters or like 2-3 inches. Soil is so compact. And my theory is that the alleyways or driveways are 2/3 of your land. And if you compact that 2/3, then the plant don't access to that resource. So you're losing 2/3 of your land to nothing. But if you manage your alleyways well, that resource would be available for your plants. It would improve the resilience of your crop. So it is extremely important to manage the alleyways. So compaction is an issue I mentioned. You can take care of compaction with deep or subsoiling, which is very expensive and is very temporary. So you subsoil your soil in the alleyways and it will last maybe a year or two. The other option is cover crops. Some of the cover crops have that taproot that can break into the hard pan and then improve your soil. It's improved when you have a hard pan or a compacted soil, the water doesn't go well, so the infiltration rate into the soil is very low. You want to improve that. You want to break that hard pan for sure. So we planted here last year tillage radish, and it goes, the taproot, so sometimes it goes up to like a very good, like 0.5 meter or so, and it breaks anything like any hard pan. It has the capacity to break that. So that's another use of the cover crops. And of course, enhancing the biodiversity and improving the yield stability is very important as well. And what I mean by the yield stability is that you see with all these climate extremes that we have. So last year we had a heat dome, this year we had a cool weather, everything is behind. So reducing that variation in the yield from year to year as a result of the climate events. When we have cover crops or some of the other management like mulches, it will reduce that variation, a huge variation in the yield. One last thing, and that would be the last thing I'm saying, and then we can go and start seeing the plants. As much as I want to speak like less speech and more action, there's some important things I think I need to mention. And that is the characteristics for choosing cover crops for vineyards or orchards. That's very important. And many of the literature that you're looking, if you go on internet and search, when they talk about cover crops, it is field crops. So they're all focusing on the field crops, how we can grow cover crops after field crops. Or within I had experience growing cover crops in corn. So we call that interseeding cover crop into the corn. But very, very different than this scenario of the vineyards and orchards. So we want a low establishment cost. That's a major factor. So you don't want to spend you don't want to get a bag of seeds for $500. Nobody afford that. So economy is important when you're doing cover crops. You want to be able to do that. You need to choose perennial versus the annuals. If the annuals are self-seeded, that's very important. But you want to avoid the plants that are invasive. So for example, in the alleyways, it's fine. Sometimes we planted the hairy vetch. Hairy vetch, if you let it go to the seeds, it can be invasive and it can get everywhere. We don't want a hairy vetch because it's a start climbing to the vine and fruiting zone and make a huge trouble for the growers in the harvest. So we want to avoid that plants getting into the under vine, and mowing that is an issue. So another plant that we had some success with that, but we didn't like it, is the mustard. So mustard produce a lot of seeds. It grow really tall under vine. It get into the fruiting zone. We don't want that. And if you kill it, if you mow it like late, then the seed is gonna scatter everywhere and it become an invasive species. So some cover crop has the potential to become invasive, and we need to watch for that. You need fast and early growth. So because we're dealing with a huge seed bank, and you can compare like where we have the cover crop compared to where we don't. So you need something that can compete with the weeds. If you have the best cover crop and it doesn't compete with the weeds, it's gonna be choked quickly, is not going anywhere, is not gonna have, and those of you that are farmers, nobody has time to go and pull the weeds. So you need the cover crop to do that for you. And please, when you're looking at our plots, look at the weeds and see how many weeds you can find. If it's a good cover crop, you barely can find any weeds. And we didn't do any weeding. We just planted the cover crop last year. These cover crops, they all planted last spring. This is the second year. So many of those are perennial. But we had also an annual, which is the cereal rye or winter rye plus vetch. And because this climate was mild, they came back this year. They're annual, but they came back this year. And because we saw that they're doing good and they have a good cover, we just let them go. We didn't reseed them. Traffic tolerance is another one, because you got to drive in the drive rows. And if your cover crop is sensitive, you drive on that, it's going to die and it's going to leave very narrow kind of strip in the middle. So you're losing some of that space that you have. High ground coverage, you need to have a good coverage on the ground. Otherwise, if there is an empty spot, the weeds start growing. I prefer the plants that they're late flowering, because when they flower, then that would be the end of their cycle. Winter hardy, so if you have a perennial cover crops, you would like it to be winter hardy, so come back next year so you don't have to plant it again. Regrowth after mowing. So I had some of these fantastic legumes, but when we mowed it, it's gone. It never came back. So you gotta watch for that. And I mentioned the invasiveness. And the last thing is the water requirement. So if you have a cover crops that need watering every 2-3 days, it's not gonna work in this region. The water scarcity and also the need of the water for the main crop and the cover crop, they should match. So if you have a cover crop that needs a lot of water, the vine doesn't like that much water, so they kind of like, it doesn't fit with this cropping system. That's, I think, enough for the speech. Now let's divide to 2 groups. One group goes like half of you if you go with Gene and see some of the equipment. Are you going to show the equipment as well? Yeah. Yeah, so the equipments are here. Also some of the cover cropping that he did. And half of the group come with me, please. And then we switch after we finish the little tour in both sides. Okay, so this whole area, I think we have 11 or 12 rows are the area that we're doing our experiment. It is a replicated experiment, of course. So we have every treatment that we have, it replicated 4 times. So we just wanted to do that for the sake of the research and then being able to do statistical analysis here. I mark, and I have my master student working on this project. So she did all the management. Her name is Jamie Yearly. And she wanted to be here, was very excited, but this morning they just called him and her aunt had tested positive for COVID. So she missed to come here and apologize, but said hi to all of you and hope you enjoyed the tour. But we mark, so I mean like from this row up to that row that you see the sign, all that is the area that we're doing the experiment. We picked 2 of the rows, so one is this one with this sign and also red flag, and also that one to just show you, because but then after I show you, you're welcome to wander here and see the other plots for yourself. I want to show one plot of each treatment to you so you can see. And what we have 3, and if you look at that pamphlet that I gave you, this is the selection of the cover crops. If you look at this table here in the middle, it says which cover crops we have. For the alleyways, we have 1 fescue and white clover mixture. So fescue is a grass. We have 3 different kind of fescue that we mix with each other, and then we mix it with the Dutch white clover. In most of the plots, you just see the Dutch white clover, so a little bit of fescue. And you see the grasses, establishing the grasses is very difficult in the vineyard. So they're not competitive. They take over by the other plants, either weeds or if you have another species in the mixture. Second is perennial ryegrass. So I always try to mix one grass and a legume. So we wanted to have both, so they're helping each other and get the benefit of both. So we have perennial rye, and then I had radish in this second one. So radish is extremely important. The site has a lot of weeds, and this is where we don't planted anything, and you see the weeds, how they grow, like really dense. Very hard to compete with them. Tillage radish grows really fast. It knocks down all the weeds, and then we have these white clover and the ryegrass growing under the tillage radish. So tillage radish is an annual, so it won't last. So we had it last year, now we don't see it, but it helped establishing the white clover and the grass. So they both grow under that. By the end of the season they established. This year they came back very strong, no weeds. So this is how you can knock down the weeds if you have a lot of weeds, to have one nurse crop that grow really fast and compete with the weeds. And one other aspect of the radish is that it has this allelopathic effect with the weeds as well. So it's kind of chemically and physically knock down the weeds. And the last one is the cereal rye and hairy vetch. So the first two in the alleyways are perennial mainly. The last one is annual. And we're going to see this cereal rye is amazing for controlling the weeds. No weeds is growing under the cereal rye, which is really fantastic. For undervine, I have three. I have perennial ryegrass and bird's foot trefoil. Bird's foot trefoil is a legume, and it's native to this region, is one of the very few legumes that are drought resistant. So it doesn't need a lot of water. But again, the downside is that it's very hard to establish it. It's very big. If it's established, if you can establish it, is awesome. It has a lot of benefits, but it's very hard to get it established, and you're gonna see it here. Next one is winter lentil. That Gene has a lot of experience, and Ed, a lot of experience with that. Establish really well, compete with the weeds. It doesn't get too tall. It just go like maybe 15, 20 centimeters tall. And it grows fantastic. It reseeds itself. Fantastic cover crops for undervine.
Actually, the reason we use winter lentil, it's kind of several reasons. Because any lentil will do the job. But you can see winter lentil spring or fall. It will act the same as a spring lentil. But if it goes to seed, it grows that summer and fall, you have lentil next year.
Next year,
So that's why we use the winter lentil. But any lentil works.
Absolutely. And one other benefits that Ed can talk to that is controlling the powdery mildew. So since they have the lentils, they have much less pressure of the powdery mildew. If you have the right cover crop, it can attract the beneficial insects. It can also reduce the pressure from the diseases. Those of you who are vineyard manager or own vineyard, you know that some cover crop that the vineyards owners, they hate it, is in this region is alfalfa. Nobody like alfalfa. Nobody want, because it's crawl into the wine row. It has very deep root, and it start competing with the wine. So that's what we don't want. In other cropping system, however, alfalfa is a top cover crop. So everybody loves the cover crop. It's not as much as issue in the orchard. In the vineyards, definitely it is a major issue in this region. Okay, and then I have Ladino clover, which is a white clover under vine, and I want you to pay attention to Ladino clover. It was one of the best cover crops under vine that I established in the past few years. So very, very successful. It's winter hardy. It come back always the next year stronger. But remember, with the perennial cover crops, you're kind of aiming 2 or 3 years. And after 2 or 3 years, then you need to renew it because it start getting patchy and it start getting weak. So with the Ladino white clover as well as with the Dutch white clover, every 3 years, I would suggest that you renew it. Okay, let's walk into, and if half of you goes this side and half this side. So I want you to compare this area that you're standing with that area. So we didn't do anything there. And here is cover crop. This is the alleyway, fescue, and white clover. So this is the cover crop we have in the alleyway. Under vine, we have the annual rye and bird's foot trefoil. So you look in this area here. We have the annual rye is growing. So this is planted this year. So under vine, we planted every year, except for the Ladino white clover. So this is the new. And if you want to see the bird's foot, are these little plants. All that are bird's foot. These little thing here in the middle of the grasses, these little ones. When they establish, it become a big plant. But in the established year, here. So if you plant the bird's foot trefoil by itself, it's not going to compete and it's going to die. So we always need to support it with another plant. Here in the alleyways, you see a lot of Dutch white clover. You don't see much fescue, so you may want to look for the grasses. Not many. So it didn't really establish well. So, but definitely impressive. And you see very little weeds here. So if you compare it with that area behind you, see there is no weed and we didn't do anything with the weed. It's just the competition between the plants. So we kind of encourage that competition, and no fertilizer applied in the alleyways or this area. Let's walk.
How long
Yeah.
do you irrigate this? All season long, or just until fruit set, or?
So irrigation, this is a very good question. So we always try to reduce the irrigation. When we establishing the cover crop, until it germinates, we have to irrigate it more often, of course. And then we try to reduce it during the growing season to 2 times per week. And then if we can, the goal is that to reduce it once per week. And we continue that to like almost end of August. And then later it just wet naturally. The weather will provide like enough water for them to survive the rest of the. So we will start from late in May irrigation, and we go till end of August. And our goal is that to reduce it to once per week, but so far we have done twice per week irrigation. Especially if we're getting to that heat like last year, we have to really irrigate it. So if you have, in this region, if you have a cover crop in the alleyways, you can't get away with no irrigation at all. It would be very difficult. So you need to have some kind of sprinklers to irrigate the alleyways.
Hey Mehdi, one more question, sorry.
Yeah.
I'm noticing a pretty hefty population of pocket gophers, and I guess I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have we looked at that? Have we looked at sort of comparing cover crops and what the pocket gophers like, the habitat? Because that's definitely a concern.
It is a concern. So attracting these mammals that can have damage to the vineyards for sure is an issue. We haven't really compared it, but looking at rest of the, just visually observing, I don't feel that this is the cover crop that attracted them. And we never allow the cover crop to grow that tall that they can actually hide in that and benefit from that. But do you have any experience?
Lots of gophers.
Yeah.
And any cover crop, really, that doesn't matter what it is.
So you don't notice anything more?
No, not really.
Well, growing things that attract songbirds, feed birds and stuff. It brings in the predatory birds, and they attack everybody. So.
But if the pocket gophers are all subterranean, you never really see them. They don't.
Well, they do travel above ground.
Yeah.
They do,
Yeah.
but,
Okay.
not for long.
Yeah, so the whole system works together, and what I heard from Ed and from Gene is that so they kind of encourage the birds and the predators, and that reduce the pests, different type of pests that they see here. So the system is kind of start adjusting itself and become to a balance. But you have to have certain like mentality to resist some weeds and some pressure from the pests and insects. So that is just like when you're doing organic, you got to be open to those things, right? So for the next like 3 alley that you can see up to there, the alleyways is the same. So for the sake of ease of the planting with the cedar, we planted the alley the same. The only differences of these 3-4 plots is the undervine cover crop. So here you have the Ladino clover, and you see the white clover growing under the vine. So over there we had the grass and we had the bird's foot. Here we have the Ladino clover. Very good. Yes, it is. Yeah, it's a legume.
Inoculate the legume seed?
Yes, yes, we did. We did. So this Ladino clover, I love it. It doesn't grow too tall. It's comeback, winter hardy, I mentioned. Very competitive with the weeds. So the difference of what you see in the alleyways and what you see here under vine, they look very similar. They're both clover and white clover, but this one is intermediate white clover, more drought resistant in the alleyways. Under vine, we want it to be, because there is always water here in this area, so there is drip irrigation. We don't need a lot of watering. It's more aggressive, so it knocks down the weeds much faster here, this Ladino clover compared to the Dutch white clover. And the leaves are bigger if you look at.
Another question, do you have a control where you're actually mechanically weeding for comparison with yield, yield, or what are your controls?
Our controls is, so we just do the mowing at the same time. We didn't seed anything. We cultivated at the same time that we planted these, and then we let it go, and then we mow it at the same time. So whatever, the irrigation is the same, the mowing is the same, everything that we do to the cover crop plots, we do to those plots, which I'm going to show you that we didn't plant anything. So we just let the weeds to grow, and then we mow it.
And what would standard practice, like without a cover crop?
Without the cover crop, some people...
Organically, it's mechanically.
Mechanically. And
Or whatever.
Grass or something.
some of the vineyards, they just do the conventional, they do one grass and then they let it go, they just mow it. They keep mowing that over years.
Yeah, but that would be interesting to collect some data
On
yield
mechanical,
comparisons.
mechanical weeding for sure, yeah. So that would be for the next experiment.
Yes.
So I'm really happy. If you want to say a suggestion for the undervine, I really like this. And consistently in different, I have it also at the station, very successful Ladino white clover undervine. And no sign of competition.
Any increase in cutworms or leafhoppers or leaf rollers because
No.
of the cover here?
We did not. We didn't specifically measure, but we did not notice any. And I haven't read anything about these plants hosting these kind of. We did an experiment in the greenhouse for the Blackfoot to see if any of these cover crops they're host for the Blackfoot. And we just submitted the paper. So what it came out, there was some differences between the plant. Something that was a very good host was the Phacelia, which I hated that because I love Phacelia. It's beautiful, it grows really nice, and it attracts a lot of like beneficial insects. The flower can last more than a month and a half. So I love that. I just hate that was the results that we got from the greenhouse study. But paying attention to that is very important. So before, when I do the selection, I had Winfred brassica as one of the species, Winfred brassica for undervine. I also had the turnips, red top turnip, and they both did awesome. They control the weed, they grow so nice, but the issue with that was Winfred brassica attracted some aphids and spider mite, which I did not like it at all. And then the turnip, which everyone was so excited, and the grower that we have in Klala was just eating that and said, I want to produce that and I want to sell it. It's a start, especially in the sandy soil, it started attracting the wireworms. So, and I thought it might be a host for the cutworm. So I stopped using that.
One of the things we've noticed from the very beginning is using mustard, and we've gone from yellow mustard to oriental mustard, which is a low growing variety. It's definitely made a big difference over the whole farm with controlling cutworm and wireworm.
Yeah. I heard that, and that's a very good observation. Yeah.
For the tillage radish that you use, do you find any worms or pests are prone to that?
I saw some wireworms attracting to that, but not as much as what I saw in the turnip. So they love turnip. They were all over it. So.
Yeah, but they are in the soil everywhere.
They are in the soil
Yeah,
everywhere. Yeah.
If they eat the cover crop, I'm not sure it really makes a huge difference.
Yeah, no.
They will,
yeah, exactly.
First started breaking up virgin prairie, it was right full of wireworm, and they would grow flax for the first 2 or 3 years before, and it wouldn't get rid of them, bring the population down, because something about flax affects the wireworm's cycle, and it drops the population down, and so you can grow the other crops, and then maybe every few years you have to go back to flax to help moderate the wireworm population.
Interesting, yeah. Okay, so next one is this one. We skipped that plot. We just still planted the alleyways, but we skipped that because some of the vines, they were not in good shape when we started. So we skipped to this one. And this one, the difference is still the same fescue white clover, and you only see the white clover, but undervine is lentils. So lentils are these guys. these little guys. And if you come back in a month, we had a very cool weather, so they didn't grow much fast. But in a month, they're gonna cover the whole thing. So you're just gonna see the lentils. You can't believe how fast they grow if the weather is suitable and they have enough water. And lentils are a legume, so they can fix nitrogen. And in terms of the water, they're more kind of moderate use of water. So most of the legumes, they need a lot of water, but these guys, they're relatively like low in the water. And they establish really well under vine. They don't compete, the roots are very superficial, they don't get too tall. And Gene mentioned that they have a positive effect on controlling the powdery mildew, which is a huge issue for the vineyards.
Is this type of lentil commercially available easily?
Yes, yeah. Just winter lentil. Mortar, I think, is the mortar lentil. Yeah, and the seeds cheap. So I think you can get a bag for like $20-30. Wow. So it's pretty cheap. That's why. So this one is the control. So, and the control is that we didn't have anything planted in the alleyway, anything planted under vine. So you can compare what you see here. If you do nothing, you just at the same time that we tilt there, we tilt here, and then anytime we haven't mowed still anything. So for this year, we didn't have enough growth to mow it, but this is if you don't do anything. So that compared to that. And in the pamphlets, we look at the nitrogen. We thought, okay, because always people asking me that why don't you just let it go and whatever grow the weeds, why they're more adapted to the climate, they're growing well, you don't have to do anything, they're drought tolerant, just let the weeds grow and they're cover crops. So my answer to that, which is a very valid question, right, is that one issue is the pests and diseases. So they can attract pests and diseases that you don't want. So you have no control. In the middle of the fully controlled system, you have something that's out of control. So you basically, you want to really watch for that. And the other thing is that we look at the nitrogen in those average in the plots. We have 1.3% in the weeds versus 3% in the cover crops. So huge amount of nitrogen, huge amount of carbon that we can encourage with the cover cropping. So it can be 2 to 3 times more than the weeds. Plus you get other benefits, and you have always this concern that the weeds may attract pests and diseases. Yes.
So have you done any analysis on which of these cover crops are fixing more carbon into the soil?
I did, and I have a publication that is going to come out just very recent. So that's a long story. If I want to make it really short, clovers, they decompose really fast. So legumes, they have this low C2 nitrogen, carbon to nitrogen ratio. So you want to have a balanced carbon to nitrogen ratio in order to keep the organic matter in the soil. Okay. Otherwise, any organic matter entering to the soil, if there is a lot of nitrogen, they're going to burn, they decompose very fast, and they won't last more than 2-3 months. So that's why I'm always trying to mix the legumes with the grass. Grass has high C2N ratio, legume has low C2N ratio. The average of those, it become a balanced C2N ratio. And the resident time for the carbon, we want to have at least 1 to 2 years. So that's what we're aiming. If we entering a carbon to the soil, we would like to stay for a year at least, minimum. If it decomposes faster than that, it has no use. You can't get the benefit of that. So if you only grow legumes, then the composition is much faster. However, the top of the plants, legumes, they much more decompose faster compared to the roots, because roots are in the soil and protected by the soil particles. So that is a very, very good question. So to looking at the decomposition rate of different cover crops.
So it's the CO2 nitrogen ratio for how stable it is, but there's also something about how deep the roots are going, because then they stay.
The root and type of the soil that you have. Okay. The more clay soil that you have, it protects, they call it physical protection. It protects the little pieces of the organic matter or or the crop residues, and it lasts longer. The carbon stay longer. The more sandy that you have, like this side, and what we did to increase the capacity of the soil for holding organic matter in this kind of soil is adding biochar. So I added a mixture of biochar compost, 1-to-1 ratio, and I mix it with the soil, top 10 centimeter at the start, and then I planted the cover crop. And the turnover time of the carbon, it increased like significantly. So we can increase it from 3 months decomposition to more than a year, just by adding these biochar.
How much biochar did you say?
We applied, it was a mixture of the biochar and compost, 1-to-1 ratio, 22 tons per hectare dry matter weight. 22. So that means like about 11 tons of biochar, and then you don't have to do that every year. You do that every 3 years or more. Because the biochar doesn't decompose. It's gonna stay there, but it's gonna start protecting the organic matter that entering to the soil, like the fresh residues from the cover crops.
When you say mix it in, are you tilling it in?
You're tilling it in a surface, very surface, like top, like maybe 4 or 5 inches. So this one is different. So remember what we saw there with the alleyways? We had a lot of clover. This is not clover. So this is a mixture of, here you see, cereal rye or winter rye and hairy vetch. So these purple flowers, a hairy vetch. So that's a nitrogen fixer. It fixes nitrogen very effectively, and it has that allelopathic effect. It can control the weeds.
But it's invasive.
It is if you let it to go to the seed. Hans has a lot of experience with the with the wedge.
But you can manage it.
You can manage it.
But this is a very thin stand of wedge, I find.
So wedge, and this is the winter rye. Winter rye, very effective. So look at very little weeds that you can find here in these, and this is the second year. So if the first year that we planted that, we had absolutely gorgeous coverage, no weeds, and they grow well with each other because the wedge can climb over the winter rye. So this is very successful cover crop. It's awesome. And something that we did that it worked really great was that we planted this in the fall. We came in the spring, it goes to the head very quick. So like May, end of May, you already have these heads. And we roll it, and you're gonna see the roller crimper later on. We roll it, and then we planted the cover crop into that mulch on the surface. And it was fantastic. We had no weeds, the cover crop established, the next cover crop established, really, really great. So this is something I really recommend if you wanna have an annual cover crop in your alleys, or if you have weed problem, lots of weeds in your vineyards or orchards, and you wanna get rid of them, planting this a few years is gonna take care of it.
Looks like it's been, the top has been mowed.
Receding? Yeah, from the receding, yeah. I didn't want them to recede. We just cut the tops. Yeah. So again, under vine, we have the lentils. So you see lentils are coming up here. Oh, the winds is kind of like blew our signs. So again, the alleyways is the same, but we have the Ladino clover in the under vine. So you can see again, Ladino clover established really well. So we have all different combination of these 3 treatments. We wanted to see if we combine those different combination of undervine and alleyway, that has any effect or no, or they're totally acting separately. So that's why we have all these different kind of combinations. And you see all these row till like next 2 or 3 panels, they're all the same mixture of the winter rye and vetch. Less vetch came back this year. Last year we have much more vetch in the alleyways, but winter I think take care of them and we didn't allow them to go to seed. So whatever came back is from the last year.
So you said that your second plot or your second test site was in West Kelowna. That was Kalala.
Kalala.
So were there any interesting things that you found there versus here?
Yes, absolutely. So here you need more water, more irrigation than there because the soil is heavier over there and is a little bit cooler. Something very interesting that happened last year in Kalala, we had amazing establishment of the cover crops, same cover crops, exactly same experiment. And I was so impressed. Here it was because it's sandy and very hot last year. We had we had a good establishment, but not as good as what we had in Kalala. This spring we came back and we said, okay, Kalala, we don't have to worry about Kalala. Let's go check here. We came check here in mid-May and it was awesome. Everything was there. I said, oh, great. So Kalala is awesome. We went to Kalala and there was nothing. So, oh my God. Like Jamie called me and said, you should come here. I said, what's going on? I said, there's nothing here. I said, how that's possible? Last year we had a good establishment. I said, no, they all gone. So we had less than 50% of the cover crops lasted, and mainly because of the winter damage that we had and low snow pack there. So a lot of winter damage, and that brings me to that because I always suggesting that growers should go with the perennials, and that changes what I saw. It kind of bring me to thinking maybe for the northern sites or the sites that there is high chance of winter damage, annuals are better because we have to go and plant everything again this year there. So I didn't take you there because they just started germinating there this fall, so you wouldn't see much.
Last year I did a thing in late August. I thought we needed some extra grazing for feed, so I put some oats and peas and a few things together, and I thought I'm going to fool around with a little bit of winter triticale in this mixture, seed it in the summer. And I didn't put quite enough, but I had grazing this spring. With that enough triticale grew that we had a place to put the cows because everything else was so slow we got.
Nice.
So I'm going to fool around more with that, like maybe try like up to maybe a bushel even of winter triticale seeded with something else in the summer.
Yeah.
I think they say with rye you shouldn't see much seed in the summer. Triticale, I think you can get away with that because it's got, the wheat genes in it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, so a lot of things with that, the experience is very important. So people who experience things for years, like Ed and Hans, they kind of start learning that, okay, how this works. And there is that interaction with the soil and with the climate or microclimate that you have that you need to pay attention. So to giving a recipe for everyone and say, here, this is gonna work 100% for your vineyard, it's not true. As much as I would love to do that, but it doesn't work that way. So you got to pay attention to different signs, and you can always choose it wisely based on what you're hearing and the research and everything. But at the end, it's better always to try a few rows and then see how that works for your vineyard before you go ahead and spend a lot of money planting everywhere into something. Yeah, that it doesn't come back. So let's go to that row at the end, and we have another series of treatments there. So this is the irrigation system. We have these sprinklers under canopy sprinklers, and this is the drip. So the drip works for the rows under vine, and the sprinklers, they're irrigating the cover crops in the alleyway. And they adjust separately. We have timers, so we can actually adjust the time based on the different factors. One important factor in the irrigation is ET, or evapotranspiration, and depends on the weather and how hot it is. There is more evaporation and transpiration from the plants, so we can adjust the irrigation based on that. Okay, so again, similar mixture, but we just try to play with the grasses to see which grasses works better. And here we have, again, we have the Dutch white clover we had everywhere else, and we had the radish to establish it last year, but we have perennial rye. So over there, if you remember, we had fescue. Here we have perennial rye. Fescue, we didn't see any fescue, very, very few. But here, perennial rye, we see more of perennial rye. So all these are, this is the perennial rye. So we see that perennial rye did a little bit better. You see more of that here. So all that perennial rye is growing. So we want to have some grasses. That's what I like, to have grasses with the legume. Perennial rye seems to do well. Both fescue and perennial rye, they're very resistant to the traffic. So you drive on them, they don't care, they come back. Again, same as the white clover, you drive on them, you come back. But some other plant species I drove on them and they disappeared. Under vine, we have the Ladino white clover again.
So this patch seems to have a lot of leafhoppers for some reason.
Last year there was like a lot of leafhoppers in the hole, and that was because of the heat, not the cover crops, of course. So we expect that they come back, some of them they come back this year. So the undervine is different. In this one we have lentils, and very good establishment of lentils. Look at that. So if you come back in a month, they're gonna cover the whole undervine. So beautiful establishment of lentils here. I just wanted to show you this is different than there. We have the annual rye and the bear's foot. So annual rye is establishing, and usually as we go towards end of the season, we have a better establishment of these grasses and also the bear's foot. So these little ones are bear's foot, very little, tiny. They started establishing, they started coming up, and we don't have much weeds because we had the cover crop here last year, so it's doing well.
How is the bird's foot cost-wise? Do you know?
It's little pricey, yeah, and hard to find. Okay. So the rest of the plots is just repeated because we have 4 applications. Everything else is repeated. We put signs for some of them, but if you would like to walk, you're welcome to walk in some of these plots and compare those and see different things and see how many weeds you can find. And so this is, to me, is a success. So we didn't want to have much weeds. We wanted to have a low growing cover crop in the alleyways. We wanted to fix some nitrogen. So we got all these benefits from most of these cover crops that you see. And the reason that most of those they work because we did a pre-selection. So I did a greenhouse experiment. I did a big field experiment before I come to this conclusion and choosing these cover crops. So it was some work before we getting into these mixtures to see what works, what doesn't work. And now, last year, this year, we do all kind of measurements. We do the carbon in the soil, nitrogen in the soil. We cut the cover crop. We measure the dry matter input from the cover crops, carbon and nitrogen in the cover crops. We're looking at the yield. We're looking at the quality parameters of the fruit, such as like TA, pH, yeast assimilable nitrogen, yank. So we're looking all these parameters to see what is the impact of these cover crop on the whole cropping system.
So I guess before you have all that information, do you have an idea of which one will be the best undervine versus?
I did a big literature search and I picked everything that I could. Sometimes you get some weird information. So there was a scientist from Cornell University that recommended to put buckwheat under vine, and so we didn't know. We thought, okay, maybe that's a good idea, because she said that works perfect. We planted under vine. They get too tall. They were they needed a lot of water. No water resistance. You have to water it every 3 days, otherwise they would die. They get this tall. I hated them. They're just like awful. So we kind of phased it out. So that's why I did greenhouse, but I didn't stop with the greenhouse. I did a field experiment, because everything in the field might turn out different than what you see in the greenhouse. So based on that, first literature, then greenhouse, then a field testing, and then I moved to the full testing of everything. So when I did the field testing, I focused on the establishment of the cover crop. I didn't measure anything in the vine. So I just did the establishment and carbon and nitrogen and all those kind of things. And based on that, I came to this narrow the list. But doing research with cover crop is not easy. So a lot of efforts that you need to do. and we wanted to pick something that is less effort for the grower, and economically it makes sense, so they don't have to spend tons of. But I had initially some mixtures or some seeds that were extremely expensive, and in the literature they said, oh, use this is perfect, vineyards, it works great. And I noticed two things. One, in some of those research, they go and they pull the weeds out because they want to have a clear cover crop experiment. I said, no, that's not practical. That is wrong. I can't do that. And second is that there is no mention of the cost. So they put like buffalo grass, which is like a bag of $500. Nobody can afford that kind of like expense. So, and because they do weedings, they don't have that competition into the picture. So something that they say, it's great, it works very, so many benefits. When you plant it, the weeds, they're gonna take over and you're gonna have zero success. But I'm learning from people who did it more in their field. So they have tons of experience. They try different things over years, and they come up with something that it works for their vineyard.
Yeah. And so in this set, like for example, the vetch and the rye versus this, you would go with this because you don't have to seed it annually. Maybe.
If your perennial works good and if you have the right recipe and it works, I prefer that over the annual, because you don't have that expense and the energy cost for every year and the time. So time is very important. The growers are so busy, they have so many things to do, so you don't want to really add to that load as much as possible.
Is there something that stands out that really supports the quality of the grapes that Gene would be really happy with?
That is a good question. This is what we're measuring. So I have 1 year of data. This year is the main year I'm collecting the data. So I want to see what is the effect on the fruit quality. So there are different things that are affecting fruit quality. One is sometimes grape, they like less water, or sometimes they like a little bit of competition. So then you get more material or what you want in the grapes. So all these play a role, as well as the moisture. So the cover crop creates a microclimate, and that is what we're monitoring. We're monitoring the moisture and temperature in the soil, both in the alleyways and in the rows. So I have sensors that here buried under the soil, and we monitor that to see what is the effect on the soil moisture and temperature. So there's a lot of things, a lot of interaction. The organisms, we're sending the organisms in the soil, both in the alley and row, to analyze for the composition of the microbes. So that data is still, I haven't got the last year data back. So because of the COVID, it's kind of slowed down the thing, so we're behind in some of these tests, such as soil biology. So we're gonna look at these interaction between the organisms and the plant roots as well.
Are you going to be able to make wine as a control for it as well?
I would love to do that, but I don't think I can do that. But for the next experiment, maybe we can coordinate with someone that do enology, because we are more into the viticulture. The enology people, they deal with the wine and quality of wine and those aroma and everything else. So in the next experiment, we suggested some of those measurements, so we can come up with some idea about the sensory attributes of the wine.
Yeah, because if you're cultivating different microbes, you probably have a different sensory result.
It's possible. It is possible. That's what would you expect, right? So we're hoping to improve the soil health. Yeah. We're hoping that the soil health impact the quality of the wine as well. That's the idea. Any other questions?
Are you also looking at mycorrhiza populations in the various, especially where you have grasses?
We haven't done it in this experiment. In the next experiment, that's one of the things that we do. So we're going to look at the mycorrhiza and see what is there, because mycorrhiza is one of the organisms that's kind of have the symbiotic relationship with the plant roots, and it helps the plant to uptake, especially phosphorus, some of the nutrients, become more resistant to the diseases and so on. So mycorrhiza is very important for the grapes. So we're going to look into that if we get funded.
So hands, get some more money.
No, Hans is great. Always supportive. Very, very supportive. We really appreciate that. Okay, if there is no more questions, let's. Thank you. Thank you very much. So it's a huge area. I prepared a report for the government on the cover crops across the country. Lots of information, lots of unknown. For example, very, very few studies on the effect of cover crops on the greenhouse gas emission. Yes. And this is something that the government is very interested because they have a commitment to the international community to reduce the greenhouse gas emission by 2030 and then zero net by 2050. So a lot of focus on the greenhouse gas emission, and they want us to provide data on these cover crops, but very, very little information is out there. So there is certain areas of the cover crop that they need more and more research. And one other thing that we're planning to do is that, and I already did some of that, is to create a website. Then you can enter your vineyard information in that website and the goals that you have. Of course, the goals are very important. Someone want to reduce the erosion, someone want to add the organic matter to the soil. So it depends on the kind of priority of your goal. It will give you a range of the best cover crops for your vineyard. And then the next step would to convert that to an app on your cell phone. So you can just put the information in your cell phone and it give you a list of the plant and say the best is this, and then second, third, fourth. So that would be ideal to make it more practical. Also, we're hoping for incentives from the government to pay for the activity and risk that you're taking. So you planting cover crops in your vineyard, you absorbing certain risk. So the government, we're hoping that kind of start providing some incentive for the cover crop, especially when they see the benefits for the greenhouse gas emission.
Or at least to cover the costs, because it
cover the costs, yeah.
So
that new fund does cover
some,
bit
yes,
things.
which is great. So we're getting there. We've been fighting for the past 10 years to get something, to get close to that. US started earlier, from several years ago. They have these incentive for the growers. Canada, we were struggling with that I think is getting there slowly. We developed a model based on the 4 years study, past 4 years, and that model has the ability to select the cover crops, rank the cover crops and say, based on these conditions, these are the top cover crops for the alleyways and for the undervine. So that's kind of the goal that we're kind of trying to achieve with the new project as well, completed. We already halfway into that. We have the model, but we need to create the website and we need to collect more data and then repopulate the website, and then that become a tool for the grower for decision making. We call it a cover crop decision making tool. And Promise is also working on that for the rest of the crops. So I'm more focused on the vineyards here, maybe a little bit orchards. The Promise is doing a much bigger project for the rest of the crops. They may include vineyards and orchards, but they rely on our data mainly. Okay.
Now, in my personal experience, if you do cover cropping over the long term, every once in a while you benefit from cultivation. Maybe every 2 or 3 years do one pass with a cultivator. Are you trying to think about doing this as well? Because just to rejuvenate some of the cover crops, it makes a huge difference.
So you don't have to reseed after that?
Yeah. I mean, my system is basically self-reseeding, and every once in a while, if you cultivate, you get much more germination.
That's what we found is doing this back in the prairies with grain growing back 40 years ago. We didn't eliminate tillage, we watered it.
Yeah. No, I had a system where I do every other row every year, but I'm going now to every 3 years instead of every 2 years.
So keep it shallow and keep it soft.
Yeah. Yours is more like annuals. With the perennial ones, I renew that every 3 years. So I go cultivate it, reseed it every 3 years.
But you know, even the perennials, they will to some degree recede when you do a pass with the Medic, for example. When you cultivate, it comes back like crazy.
Sure.
Yeah, almost uniform carpets of
And
Medic
why
if
is
you
that?
cultivate very late in the year, because there's no competition at that time.
Yeah.
And Medic seems to like to germinate when it's cold. So you know, a really interesting thing happening in connection with that.
Is there a particular type of cultivator that you?
Well, I have a spring tooth cultivator. It's called a Rankin. It has sort of a wheel, a barrel, kind of a wheel in the back to even out. You know, just doing one pass actually makes a huge difference.
We've been using an old turnstile. I run it with about 2/3 speed of the machine and 2.5 times speed of the tractor, so it's almost like a mild rotary pull.
Yeah.
And it's just, all it does is scuff the top, cut off any mare's tail or something you don't like, and just put the seed in soil contact.
Yeah.
And that's all we want to do. No more.
Yeah.
And yeah, using the native plant species is of course a great idea. It's always like people, they're tempting to do that. It's just how to fit it within the setting that you have and the management that you have. I know I met someone last week that she's doing 3 experiments down in Oliver. And she kind of did a study surveying the native plant species around the vineyard. And then they picked the plants, they ordered that from the nursery. She got the transplants and she planted 1 native plants, which is mainly, most of them are perennial, between the 2 vines. And she picked like half an acre to do that. And then she let everything else, but she sprayed the compost tea on that. So she sprayed compost tea, so she had this treatment of the native plants with compost tea, without the compost tea, to kind of compare and see how that works. And what she's gonna do, she's gonna have that watering cans for the bats, and she wanna have NRI camera and kind of monitor the bats activity, because bats, they feeding on the insects, and then she wanna DNA analyze the feces of the bats and see if there is any connection with the insects that they're consuming. And also she has microphones that can capture the direction of these bats, which direction they're coming. So I thought it's interesting. It was a little complex for me. It more like was idealistic. So practically I showed her that there's a lot of weeds there. Some of those are invasive, and this native plant is not going to grow because the weeds already grow on top of it. So if she doesn't do any weedings, or at least weed whacking, it may not be successful. But it was interesting, I think. So we're going to do a little bit more of these drought-tolerant native species if we get funded for the next 5 years. We're going to kind of include into this, but we're going to keep this experiment going. Something else that you need to pay attention with the cover crops is that, so minimum of the time for start seeing the benefits is 3 years. So many growers, they say after the 3 years, we kind of start seeing that we can cover the cost with the benefits. They kind of started being equal to the costs. And then after the 5 years, we start getting like the whole benefits, like the full benefits.
That's what I was telling Gene when we started this. I said the experience in the prairies when everybody started it, it takes about 5 years to create a new balance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And in between you'll have all kinds of crazy things happening. So don't.
And some people, they get disappointed because they think it's like fertilizer. As soon as you put, you should see it the next day. It doesn't. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So
growers I'm talking to, they talk about new variety coming out. Say, okay, I tried this variety, it didn't work, but I give them a new variety in 3 years. If it fails 3 years in a row, then it's done. It's the same with this program.
Yeah.
You're not going to get the same results every year.
Every year, exactly. So you need multiple year research to be able to really capture all different aspects of these cover cropping.
Hey folks, how you guys doing? Excellent, excellent. So, what I was just talking about with the other group was, I guess, more generally about regenerative farming and how we're sort of applying some of those principles in our vineyard and pasture lands. So regenerative farming in a nutshell is essentially, you know, looking at the ecosystem and building soil health. And some of the ways to do that by mimicking some of the processes in nature are minimal or no disturbance of the soil, either chemically or mechanically. Keeping the ground covered with plant material at all times possible. Keeping living roots in the soil as long as possible. And maximizing the biodiversity above ground to maximize your biodiversity below ground. And then if possible, grazing those cover crops appropriately. And putting all those principles together can build soil a heck of a lot faster than just raw processes of chemical and physical weathering. So we can actually start to build organic matter in the soil in actual human years rather than, you know, millennia. So. Which is really encouraging for any of you who are interested in that field. I was hoping to live a couple thousand years, but I don't think it's going to work out that way. On our farm and how we've been sort of implementing that in our vineyard situation, we've been looking at those principles. We haven't been able to completely get away from tillage because we've just been using a broadcast seeder for our undervine mixes, which need incorporation. So that's probably next in the future universe, is to figure out some seeder that can seed undervine and drill it in rather than having to disturb the soil. But in the meantime, it allows us to basically do one seeding pass and one tillage pass in the spring. And then the cover crop will provide weed control for the rest of the season, and then provide forage crop over the wintertime for our livestock. As Mehdi was mentioning, we treat the undervine and the drive row separately. So in this case, we use fall seeded hairy vetch and winter triticale. Winter triticale is a hybrid of wheat and rye. This particular variety we have growing here is Metzger. And the one reason I like the triticale is it has good winter tolerance, cold tolerance, similar to rye, but it's basically comes to maturity about 3 to 4 weeks after rye. If any of you have grown fall rye and had it get away on you, it can get wild. And fall rye at this time would already be fully ripe and probably this high if you had some decent fertility. So, just shaking his head, yeah. And I don't think I've ever harvested or baled rye at the right time. It's always too far along before I get to it. So it's just one of those things. So anyway, the triticale, it's still probably another week before I really got to freak out about it. So, you know, that's getting you all the way to the end of June, so you have a pretty broad window to deal with it. In this case here, hairy vetch didn't overwinter very well. It was very variable depending on when it was planted last year. I guess one caveat of cover crops is whatever you're going to try, plan on probably doing the same thing for 3 years. Because 1 year will never tell you what you're going to know and such. And it's that consistency over time that you can start to build a program that, you know, you're not reinventing the wheel every spring.
So you've kind of fallen on that option for the alleyway, looking at all of those cover crops then, or experiments?
Yeah, actually I'm actually catching up too on some of Mehdi's experiments to see how they're doing in the spring and such. So we've been trying. We try actually as many species as we can fit in there, and then see what works. And you know, so long as it's you know, fits the parameters of, you know, not interfering with the vines physically or, you know, or growth wise and such. So The hairy vetch we're very careful with. We actually block off the outside drops on that cedar there, so we only seed 5 drops right down the center. That way it keeps the hairy vetch and the triticale contained in the center. And so when they get close to maturity there, we'll whack them, either crimp them like this. Other option, actually, we call it the slow-mo. We just turn down the RPM on our mower and we leave the hammers on a chopper. Because essentially what we're trying to do is just sort of get the cover crop terminated, but leave it as whole as possible so it has the longest amount of residue time on the soil surface. It's also less wear and tear on machinery too when you just turn down the speed and take it easy on it. Where are we at here?
I actually have a leftover question from over there. I can't
Yeah.
believe we didn't ask. What are the grapes?
What are the grapes?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Here is Cab Franc. Over there is Merlot.
Okay.
Yeah.
And his whole entire experiment is on Merlot.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That was an easy question. Good.
I'm always here to ask the dumb questions.
There are no dumb questions.
And we talked about different mixtures that we try. We fool around with it. Sometimes I don't always tell Gene, and he doesn't always tell me. We just take a notion and do things. And I've done some things like sweet clover is a plant I really love, but we don't want a solid mass of that in the vineyard. But I have trickled a little bit in here and there, like maybe a 1/10 of a pound an acre maybe. And that's okay. If we had a bunch of it, it would be a nightmare.
And so that actually is a good point about like seed mixes and such, and economy. The seed mix that we use is actually in that cedar right there, that Vicon there. There's lentils, flax, common vetch, phacelia, plantain, radish, and mustard. And 85% of it's lentils. They're relatively inexpensive, they're a legume, and they only grow about this high, and usually terminate by midsummer. So that's adding the economy to that mix. And then the more exotic things, like plantain and phacelia, you maybe only want like, half a pound to a pound an acre kind of thing. To try and add that diversity, those pollinators, that kind of thing. I have some examples over here of some of them that are alive, or sort of alive still. This is phacelia here. Great pollinator plant, produces nectar for a long period of time. This is one that actually reseeded itself and grew up this spring. Oh well, demonstrations not going on. These are overwintered lentils, or from last year that reseeded themselves. So that's about as, maybe a little taller, or that's about as tall as lentils get. You can see they're already forming seed pods. And once they get some seeds in there, they'll actually weight down and start to collapse. So that high rate of lentils down there basically makes a nice little mat and protects the soil.
Plus certain weeds the lentil itself doesn't kill off other plants, but the trash, certain weeds are totally allergic to lentil trash. And downy brome is one of them, and that's one of our ugliest weeds.
Which is your weed? Which one?
Downy brome is
Downy brome.
probably the worst weed to got.
Yeah.
Oh, that grass.
Yeah.
These all grow without additional irrigation.
So they grow, well, we plant them under vines, so whatever the grapes are getting, that's what they get.
So we don't. The interrows with you don't have any overhead installed.
No.
Something else I found with lentils, when I first started fooling around with them, I put lentils, common vetch, and faba beans in the same day. And the lentils were producing nitrogen loads within 2 weeks of emergence. The vetch was about 3 weeks, and the faba beans were about 5 weeks. So it doesn't make as much nitrogen as faba beans, but it does it really quick.
And depending on your soil type too, I mean, the lentils are not going to overdo it. With a good crop of vetch, you could potentially get too much nitrogen. Yeah.
Lentils are they're a desert crop, and they produce this much, and that's all you're going to get.
Yeah.
So you said phacelia is a pollinator. What are the other things that you plant for
Well,
beneficial insects, pollination, etc.?
Mustard, What else we got in there? We get a little flax.
Okay.
Yeah.
The veg attracts a lot of pollinators too.
Or
Yeah.
veg is excellent.
Yeah.
Anything that has a flower is welcome.
Yeah, and one of the principles of what we're trying to do here is trying to keep something blooming all the time. So part of that minimal soil disturbance is also leaving all the basically whatever I'm going to call them native, whatever else grows out there. There's all kinds of geranium species, little tiny things close to the ground that are blooming. We have pineapple weed, salsify. You harvest that in the fall, don't you? Is that best time to harvest salsify root?
I'm not sure that that one is actually that great to eat. The ones that you eat are a darker root.
Oh, okay.
It's almost a black root. These have more of a tan colored root. I've never tried actually.
You mentioned it. You mentioned it last year, and I've been intrigued now. Now I want to go and eat some.
Why you like it so much?
Yeah, we planted some. We added plantain this year to the mix. That's about as tall as it grows. That's a pretty vigorous plant there. It's at about 10-12 inches.
Bird clover that is coming in from the north and invading the vineyard and really almost taking over. We love that. The wild black medic.
Yeah.
And it's excellent.
Yeah, I do like that too. And it grows without irrigation in most areas, and even on sandy soil it will survive without overhead, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
And also not bad on with traffic.
Yeah.
So,
I found a woolly pod vetch that's native here, and it'll grow in gravel, like in the heat and everything like that. It's like, but it's little gray plant, only grows about this tall and such. But I don't know how you'd ever cultivate it or.
it makes incredibly hard seed pod. You almost need a hammer to open up the seed pod.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, we have a fair bit, but it does not grow in the vineyard.
Yeah.
It does not like irrigation.
Yeah. What's that? Yeah, that woolly pod
yeah.
one we found. Yeah.
It's not taking over on us anywhere. So.
No risk of that.
Yeah.
Now there's a timber veg too that grows. That is probably introduced, but it grows only about this high.
Oh, okay.
But I'm not sure whether you could establish this.
Is that the one that grows up on that slope over there on the west?
We have a fair bit on our land, but it's very, very early. I mean, it's gone to seed already.
Yeah. I think I saw some because I grazed that western hillside this year, and I was up there poking around.
Yeah. We have America or purple vetch. It's gone wild. It's a native, but it's not as it grows just as crazy as hairy vetch, but not near as much plant material. But it'll go right to the top of your wires and then run down a mile.
So that's Ed brought up another really good point about vetches, is that there are many different varieties of vetch. Some that are appropriate and some that are really not appropriate at all for in a vineyard situation.
If you're going to start, this is what we did, and I would recommend start out with common vetch. It's manageable, and learn about vetch first before you start getting the more exotic ones.
Yes.
Grazing.
Yes.
So I've seen pictures of your beautiful cattle.
Yeah.
Do they actually wander through? Like, is there anything? What are the correlations you found between what animals you're using for grazing, the cover crops that you're using? What have you learned?
Well, what we've learned, basically, it's been 5 seasons now, Ed, right? That we put the cows in the vineyard.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it has been 4 anyway, maybe 5. By doing a cover crop program, both under vine and the alleyway, and then grazing it in the wintertime when the vines are dormant, we get about 2 months of grazing for about 20-25 cows out here. And we're finding that with doing biological soil testing that we're gaining about 0.2 to 0.4% organic matter a year. With the exception of last year's heat dome. We just didn't grow any cover crops. I mean,
everything, even the lentils, they produced like 2 or 3 pods and then died.
Yeah.
That was it.
But it's also brought up the microbial activity in the soil to an extent now that we're actually cycling enough nitrogen to grow a grape crop without adding any extra.
We're finding the cows do funny things. They'll find a patch of ripe clover and eat that, and then you'll find clover patches all over, and it's a green area where a cow pooped.
And yeah, so and if you go out in the spring there, and basically all that cover crop residue has been grazed off, and you got cow pies, every meter or something like that and such. So it's been kind of fascinating to watch the transition in the soil tests over the course of those years, and how the nitrogen level. I mean, everyone talks about nitrogen. That nitrogen level's come up to a level where we can basically grow a decent grape crop. We've almost, the last 2 seasons, almost had excessive vigor. Prior to that, when we were just cultivating all the time, we'd maybe trim once. Last 2 years, we've trimmed twice. In 2020, we actually increased our yields by 30%, whereas a lot of people struggled to hold yields up in 2020. Last year we got hit with a leafhopper, and after the heat, we actually got through the heat okay, and we had a great crop. And but then leafhopper took us out in the fall, so it didn't ripen very well.
I think we did better because of
The ground cover.
Ground cover than we would have without it.
Yeah, they were bad last year.
Yeah.
There was not like down here. They started in the south. They're moving in. Where there was alfalfa, we had leafhoppers like crazy in the alfalfa, but not in the grapes. But as it kept getting hotter and everything started dying,
They move up.
yeah, they found they would rather eat alfalfa than grapes.
So with the exception of, I guess we're using, we use probably about on 30 acres a tote of fish for foliar and 3 or 4 kelp applications, and that's about it.
That attracts strange things. The first time I sprayed out here, I had 5 turkey vultures circling me.
Turkey vulture.
Nice.
They looked up every row trying to find that fish.
Since you're grazing your cattle, though, is there anything that you are like avoiding as cover crops, or that you're just intentionally going, maybe not so much of that for the impact on the cattle?
From a nutrition point of view,
Our cows eat
Doesn't
everything.
matter. They eat anything.
they pretty much eat anything. Yeah, they eat sagebrush and thistle and mustard. And,
What breed do you have?
Highland and Speckle Park.
The Speckle Park is an Angus-based breed, but it's been bred for grazing. It's a low input breed, high quality, low input.
Have you found much mechanical damage from having the cattle in the vineyard?
The horned ones are a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, mainly not so much out in the main part of the vineyard, around the waterers, end posts.
They'll find the weak posts for us in the end, so we know which ones are.
Take all the wires in with them.
Scratch on them.
No, they haven't done that much, but if the posts, sometimes they're half rotten already, and then the big cows will rub off.
They'll finish it for you. Yeah. And so I don't know. I think we figured out it took about 2 to 4 man days in the spring to like put the trellis back up, fix the fence posts and stuff like that. Probably lost a few vines on some corners. I think we can mitigate that with a few log structures and moving the waterers farther away from the corners of the vineyards. Because we had the waterer down on the corner over there. You can just see where they go around and trash 2 vines, and yeah. So there's ways to mitigate that. But overall, when I look at the the distribution of fertility and the rising fertility plane of the vineyard, it's definitely beneficial.
The Speckle Park and Angus are cold. They don't have horns, which I prefer.
Yeah.
When do you run your roller crimper typically? Is it mostly to terminate the cereals that you're planting, or?
Yeah, mainly to terminate the cereals and hairy vetch if it was actually out there.
Last year we didn't use it. I went with the slow mow because of that heat and everything going on.
Yeah.
It definitely, you kind of needed a certain amount of biomass and height, and then at the life cycle of the plant as well. So you want them in that, sort of the you know, just past flowering, you know, on the cereals, then they'll terminate properly. Yeah.
But the way this is set up, this is a very bumpy ride, I assume, because most have them at an angle.
Yeah, yeah.
I think the angle would be nicer.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We weren't that clever on welding, so.
You're going to have a lot of jigs going on with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's probably more effective that way because you get more of it pushed up.
Yeah, we have sometimes have problem with because it's straight across. Some like the triticale will go sideways, and it just
Slide
bounces
through,
back up
yeah.
again.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, what's the main purpose of it?
It's to terminate the cereal crop, so you can see the rows of, yeah. So as we roll that down there, it'll crimp the stems, you know, every 8 inches or so.
Okay.
And once it's sort of past a certain life stage, it won't actually regrow.
Except certain plants will. Sweet clover and wild mustard will come back.
Yeah, yeah. But
Kills it.
yeah, pretty much kills it. And then we're leaving the residue basically as whole as possible on the soil surface, so it has the longest amount of hang time.
So because you're not cutting it.
Yeah, and then if you mow it, so oftentimes it gets chopped up into little pieces.
Yeah.
And you know, if you go out there and chop it all up in the middle pieces, you go, oh man, I got all this biomass, and then you chop it up into all these little pieces. And next thing you know, half of it volatilizes over the next 2 weeks, and you're like, where'd it all go? I thought I had a good mulch.
With the mowers, I want to lay it there that if you wanted to bale that with an ordinary square baler pickup, you could pick it up and bale it. That's how long we want the straw to be.
Yeah. There's next on the wish list is I found a sickle bar cutter that's designed for like a bobcat or something like that, but it's a hydraulic sickle bar cutter, and I think they get them down to, what did I say, 5 feet or 6 feet?
Well, how we started thinking, I kept telling Gene, you remember those old funny birds?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
But we want to belly mount it underneath.
You don't want to push a funny bird up and down every row.
Yeah. But yeah, it's I forget what the name of the company. Yeah, it's designed for skid steers and stuff like that. But their short one is very compact. It's just run on hydraulics, so you can mount it anywhere. Run hydraulic lines to it.
We want to just stick it under that little tractor over there.
And that way, yeah, we could just cut it off and leave it as whole as possible. And
That's our dream machine next.
yeah.
Well, he's also got a programmable electric tractor on the list.
Oh yeah.
Another dumb question.
Yeah.
When you say that if it's mowed, then it just evaporates. Do you mean it just blows away because it's so windy, or what do you mean?
No,
what
it just if you cut it up too much, it just starts breaking down too fast.
Yeah.
And it won't go into the soil. It just evaporates into the air.
Yeah, part of it will just basically it'll oxidize with the sunlight and volatilize. Part of it will, and part of it will go down, but part of it will also go up.
If you leave it long, it's going to get pressed down with moisture and everything else, and you want to cover the soil.
Yeah. Yeah.
So have you noticed pest pressure differences other than the mildew with fewer weeds and having cover crops? Or?
Mustard definitely helps a lot. Like it almost eliminates the cutworm problem, and it helps with the wireworm.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you've just got a small amount of mustard seed.
Yeah, we throw about. General rule, we started out with yellow mustard, and then we went to Oriental, and then we found a newer variety of Oriental that's really leafy and short. So if you seed that anything more than a pound an acre, it covers the ground too much.
Yeah. But
a cutworm can't get through a baby mustard leaf. You'll find little tiny mustard plants with a bite out of them and no cutworms.
Right.
And the plant's still growing.
Where do you find that Oriental mustard?
we get that from Ryan, don't we?
Yeah, it's mainly mustard is grown in the drier part of the southern prairies. Yeah. When you get out of the canola area, mustard does well. So anywhere in southern Saskatchewan, Alberta.
That is a really low growing, not that type of mustard.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's called Vulcan is the variety name.
Vulcan.
Is it Vulcan? Is that the one?
The one we're growing now is Vulcan. The original variety that people used to grow was Cutlass, and that was fine. We grew that, and then after we got Vulcan from another seed grower, we found we like it much better. It's leafier and shorter.
And are wireworms a big problem in grapes, or?
I'm sure they are.
As click beetle, yeah, they can be, yeah.
Feeding on the roots.
Not so much the root feeding, but the adult forms fly and then in the spring and chew your buds out.
Oh, I see.
Mustard is one of the plants that they're working with, and it was actually an old farmers 100 years ago used mustard and flax to control wireworm in potatoes and carrots and things. This goes back like longer than
way back.
Yeah, my grandfather's dad probably taught me.
Also for nematodes, it's quite effective.
Yeah.
In sandy soil, that would definitely be an advantage.
Which one, the mustard has?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of a biofumigant.
Yeah, but it's also totally toxic to certain bugs.
Yeah.
And then flax is nice to mix with it because flax has got something in there that certain things like oats will slow down the metabolism of a grasshopper. Well, flax does that to the cutworm, or the wireworm, I mean. It'll slow down the metabolism of the wireworm and lower the population so it's manageable. And they don't know that they're not supposed to eat nothing when it's green and growing in the soil.
And the cutworms, they do actually eat. This is the Canadian version of the cutworm. They eat shepherd's purse, which kills them. But they love it so much, they basically commit suicide. It's actually quite effective. If you have a huge outbreak of cutworm, try and plant some shepherd's purse.
Yeah.
What leafy spurge?
Shepherd's purse.
Shepherd's purse, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we found with the mustard, and actually it was working with the yellow mustard, and I think it works 10 times better with the oriental because it's 10 times hotter.
I was saying to the other group too that coordinate with Emily afterwards, and because there's a few seed sources and that kind of thing that you guys might be interested in. I think it's Ryan Mercer Seeds out in.
I think we have about 5 guys down there.
Yeah, corn seeds is another one there for triticale oats.
Yeah, Tim Wilms is where we get the. Tim Wilms is probably the only guy that grew the Morton winter lentil because it didn't really fit into the program, never became widely grown in Alberta. But Tim grew some, and he's been selling us seed, and he says, if you guys keep buying my seed, I'm going to have to seed another field.
So do you have contacts for these?
Yeah.
That would be interesting. Spread that to everyone.
Yeah, definitely. I'll share that around and to the whole group there.
The seed mix and the spreader, is that pre-mixed for you?
No, we mix that ourselves. So a concrete mixer.
Oh, yeah.
And
we had a small one and we went to a bigger one. So
yeah, so the bigger mixer can do about, about 6 acres at a time now instead of 1 acre at a time.
And the lentils, how many pounds per acre are you doing?
The whole mix, we're doing about 35 pounds an acre.
So the small lentils like this, the normal seeding rate would be in around 40, 50, maybe 60 pounds an acre for growing a crop. But we found when we were growing lentils in the prairies that the heavier we seeded it, the less weed pressure we had and the more we'd get taller stuff for easier to harvest. But they've been doing studies in Saskatchewan now where they doubled and tripled the seeding rate. And when you triple the seeding rate of lentils, you have hardly any weed problem. It needs to be thick.
Okay.
So we're seeding over about 100 plus pounds an acre.
Yeah.
For the total mix.
Yeah, so because we're banding it, so like overall we're seeding 35 pounds an acre, but because it's getting banded, it ends up to that 80 to 100 in the area where it's.
So we would say at least if you find a seeding rate for the size, because there's different sizes of lentils, the size we have, the seeding rate you want to at least double that. Yeah. The normal seeding rate.
Okay.
Yeah.
But you always broadcast the seed, or do you use this method of seeding?
So yeah, we use this seeder here, the drill back here. This is a no-till drill, so we don't have to do any soil prep prior to seeding. It'll cut through 3 or 4 inches of residue on the surface.
It doesn't like tilled residue.
No. Yeah, it says no-till for a reason. So anyway, we use that for where we seeded the the triticale down the middle. That was drilled in the fall with hairy vetch. We also, so it's obviously for that it's not mounted on this tractor, But so that does fit in the vine rows.
This drill has got about, I think, 650 pounds of downward pressure, and the opening coulters in the front. We used a Schmeiser drill before, which is a heavy drill and a good drill, but it only puts down about 350 pounds of downward pressure, which is twice as much as an old IH drill. And that just wasn't doing it for us. You have to pretty much till ahead of even on that heavy Schmeiser. This one we can just walk through anything.
Yeah. Yeah, you can seed right over sagebrush with this thing.
He's gone. And low brush. He goes through and sees how many chop out and how much you It's a good way to prune your antelope brush.
Yeah.
This is Great Plains is the company, and when we're looking, I said to Gene, well, when we first started getting interested and everybody was talking about new seeding machine, Great Plains seemed to have the thing figured out, and they're always coming up with innovative ideas. And then I found out that Kubota bought the Great Plains company in Kansas.
Oh.
And they still paint them green in all through the prairies, but they paint them orange for us guys. I said, "Gee, well, I want to get a green one. I mean, that's not right getting, they're supposed to be green." He said, "Well, I wanted orange to match my tractor." I said, "Well, we could buy a green tractor then."
Yeah. So yeah, that was actually purchased locally in Oliver from Gerard. So any Kubota dealership can find them.
Because they were building green ones, we had to wait for the orange ones.
I don't think they ship very many of these little 6-footers. Normally they build 20-footers or something like that, and then they add 20s and 20s together. John at Blasted Church and Felix over at Tantalus there, they just recently bought seeders as well. So, and they have different brands, so probably good to compare notes.
Felix doesn't like it.
He's not sold on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't remember which brand he got either, but good to find out what he liked and didn't like about it though.
The Schmeiser, if your soil is more like this stuff gets hard. If you had more mellow soil, the Schmeiser is a really good machine.
Yeah. And
it's probably, if you can't get one of these, that you can make that do. But we can get one of these. So
and as Ed mentioned, it is really heavy, so you got to have your tractor really well weighted down.
We had to put a lot of extra weight in this tractor.
Yeah, it will do wheelies on hills if you're not careful. So, yeah.
Can you use that in all types of soils, more gravelly or rocky, or not really?
Yeah, yeah.
It's well built. It's, like I said, Great Plains is probably one of the best companies for seed drills, and they're built to handle all the conditions all the way from Texas to northern Alberta. So,
yeah. So no, it's yeah, because we've done some stuff over the hillside over there and gravelly ground and stuff like that, and it doesn't have a problem with that. That's where I was seeding sagebrush.
And you use the broadcaster to get under the vines.
Yeah, yeah.
There is not get it in the alleyways.
Well, it's just a funny little bit of physics, but just like those Vicons come with a broadcast head, which has got a bunch of fins on the end, and then the band it's just a broadcast head with the end cut off, and 90% of the seed goes out either side, and just a little bit tribbles in the middle. Okay. You can even screw an elbow on there, a PVC elbow, and shoot it one way.
Okay. What we find is that we don't till right under the vine. We leave a 6 or 8 inch strip, but there's enough trash in there, and that's the wettest part of the vineyard, that the seeds will survive in there.
Yeah.
Into the trash, but they won't survive on the edge of it because it's just. We've had good luck just broadcasting no tillage, but we've had bad luck more often than good luck.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's the one thing about growing a cover crop is if you, for your stated goals, you want it to be consistent and work every time. You'd be using Roundup if half the time you went out there it didn't work, one time, and then it worked 2 weeks later, So if you're going to do it right, and get it incorporated and get the best possible chance that you're going to have the weed suppression and all the other benefits that you're going to get from it. Otherwise, just kind of, you know, half doing it, you're going to be disappointed.
Like they always tell you, if you're going to broadcast seed, you should figure on using at least 2 or 3 times as much seed, because you're going to have problems.
Yeah. What would be nice though is, you know, something, you know, similar to this, but a lot scaled down, where we could go under vine and drill.
If we could find them, there's a tool that was designed in Saskatchewan, where I'm from, by a guy that wasn't that far from us, but it was a little opener that basically could mount on anything, and it was a disc on an angle that lifted the soil, dropped the seed in that under it, and then a wheel on the opposite angle to push it back down again. And you basically couldn't even see where it had gone. And they're just a little unit that you could bolt onto a cultivator frame or anything. So if we could find some of those secondhand and figure out something way to, and then you could have your seed over off behind the tractor and just let it fall down into that. Something like that would work. A hose too big and clumsy, and
yeah,
or taking too much space. But
any control rows where you maybe do a little bit more mowing? And
I did that for the last 2 or 3 years. I was doing every 10th row, like starting at 10, 20, 30, 40. I was mowing that early, and then keeping that mowed with the idea that maybe I was going to lower the. We're having a bit of a problem with domestic hay grasses, mainly smooth brome and orchard grass. I thought, well, maybe if I cut that, I would suppress it somewhat, but I didn't see a difference. So some things, I just tried it on a limited scale and found that I can't see the difference. Stop doing that. We find that doing a little thing isn't much. Like Mehdi said, we try a little bit. No, we think, okay, if we're going to try something, let's do a bunch of it and see how it's going to work. Do it all.
Yeah, it's a tough one, because, you know, you only get so many seasons to get it right. You know, and so, you know, part of the sort of the, you know, looking at the risk reward of what you're planning to do, it's like, you know, yeah, we sort of dove in and said, we're just going to try it. I mean, what's the worst case scenario? We have to cultivate it back out again, because that's what we did before. So the risk was pretty low on, you know, we didn't choose, I mean, we intentionally researched species that wouldn't get out of control on us. But then after that, it's like, you know, yeah, how much trouble are you going to get yourself into? Other than, you know, the time and energy that you spent doing it. But, you know.
I'm curious about, with all the added competition, especially if you've got all these different species that are growing,
yeah,
what the final effect is on the fruit.
Good question. I'd love someone to answer it. Yeah, yeah. I don't know. Basically, I guess more of it is sort of, right now it's all kind of theoretical and such, but essentially when you look at soil health sort of versus, you know, kind of, I guess, synthetically fertilized plants. I'll backstep a little bit. Plants don't necessarily get the nutrients straight out of the soil themselves. It's the biology in the soil that works with the plants that sequesters the various nutrients and then exchanges it with the plants for carbohydrates. And so if you're fertilizing a plant synthetically, you're only providing what you provided to that plant. Whereas the plant probably has a pretty good idea what it needs. And so it's going to signal to the rhizosphere what it needs for its optimal expression of what it is.
One of the things in our selection, we were fooling around right from the beginning of the vineyard trying different things. But we're getting information from California and Niagara Falls and France, and the stuff that they were doing doesn't work here. This is totally different. So we just started talking. I said, well, you know, this is very similar to southwestern Saskatchewan and southeastern Alberta. So we started focusing on the seeds that grow well in that climate, which is almost identical to this one. And then we found seed growers that basically farm the way we think. No tillage, you know, just enough fertilizer and chemical to keep yourself in business. And they grow things in the way we want to grow them. So we've got seeds that are already semi-acclimatized before we bring them here. And that's what's been working for us.
Yeah.
Are there not people in Washington and Oregon doing the same thing?
It's easier to get seed from southern Alberta than Washington.
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, getting back to that one thought there though is that in a crop, vineyards are an interesting crop because we most of our goals is quality over quantity for the most part, and so what we're trying to do is maximize the flavor compounds, polyphenols, all those aromatic compounds. Those are all highly structured, high energy compounds, and to build those, the plant needs a host of micronutrients, enzymes, all this kind of stuff. And so I think it's kind of, by first principles that healthy soil is going to better achieve that than a synthetic fertilizer environment.
It's like you can say we use mustard and chicken manure and some stinkweed, and there's hardly any aftertaste.
Yeah. But yeah, and then I guess to that extent too is if you there was a big meta study of wine awards done, I think it was 2 years ago or something like that, that found that in general organic wines tend to score higher, and biodynamics tended to score higher than that back to back over literally I think 30 years of wine awards looking at these things. So
finding the balance, it kind of just pure organic kind of gets people wanting to use more tillage.
Yeah,
that's kind of what we're trying to get away from.
Yeah, that was probably the biggest struggling point for us, is sort of that epiphany of that, just because we're organic, we're not being good to the soil. And
what we want to do is replicate everything on the other side of the fence, but we want to grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the long term, are you going to calculate your carbon balance on the farm? Is this one of the goals eventually?
I to some degree, I guess so. Sort of, doing the biological soil tests, is kind of giving a sense of the number and such, and you can do sort of some of the back of the napkin kind of.
Because the way you manage the cover crops, that's quite a bit of a reduction in terms of carbon input from equipment, right?
Yeah.
Do you mow more than once, or not even? You just go through with that crimper?
Probably once
or
spring
yeah.
We do the chopping every other row.
Yeah.
Sometimes I don't know, I guess we could do it once a year, right?
Yeah, I mean, last year nothing grew, so you didn't have to mow much.
Maybe we have,
maybe a couple. We've had to do it a couple times.
Yeah, like this would be. No, there's going to be some hairy vetch is going to escape all this, so we'll go in and cut that off before it gets seed pods happening too much. So it has to be an issue before we want it. We don't mow for the fun of it.
And was it you who mentioned the electric tractor? Is this something you are considering?
Yeah, I put a deposit on a Monarch. Yeah. I just see they lost a thing with the U.S. regulatory thing that they couldn't have an autonomous tractor yet. So, yeah. So,
but this is really up to you when you're running this on your own farm, or right?
Yeah, and
going to build it
Yeah, they're building the autonomy into the tractor. Yeah. I think the base tractor is some standard tractor, and then they've converted it to battery electric, and then they're putting on the software on top of that and the sensors and such. I can see some of the more useful features of it is that it responds to hand commands and such. So it has basically a sunshade around the top with cameras and sensors and stuff on it. So you can tell it to like move ahead 20 feet and tell it to stop, and
Like a dog.
like a dog, yeah. Actually, you know, I was joking with somebody. My grandfather back in the mid 80s decided to get some draft horses and farm with draft horses for a while. And I was joking that this new tractor is just like a draft horse. You can tell it to go, you know, G and ha and go stop and go. the old horses used to do that too.
Hopefully it doesn't kick them.
Keeps the vineyard cooler too with the cover crop.
Yeah, that's part of the intention of it too, is to keep the soil temperature down and keep the vineyard a little bit cooler.
I'm sure. I think our water use is down.
Yeah.
Have you recorded the temperatures?
I think it moderates. So a good cover is going to keep you from getting the soil from getting extremely cold in the winter and extremely hot in the summer. There's a guy down in Wisconsin or someplace was measuring soil temperatures in the wintertime by having a cover all the time. He was finding dramatic differences between measured the neighbor's summer follow field beside of their field and his own, and monitored the temperature every 2 weeks all winter, and it was dramatic for the winter. And I think you see the same effect in
Yeah.
I did an extremely scientific experiment during the heat of the heat dome last year. And I used my meat thermometer to measure on in the front yard and in our little plot. It's all cover cropped.
Yeah.
Our little test plot. And it was 49 in the front yard and it was 46 on the cover crop. So based on my meat thermometer.
That's good science.
Must have been about the end of March.
Yeah, it was millet and sorghum sedan.
What sheep? They're cheap. We can get funding for them.
That's one of the use of cover.
They're cheap. We can get funding for them.